I'm 5 years old and sitting in the living room, listening to my dad as he plans a fishing trip with my brother in the kitchen. I walked in and said, "Can I go with you, Dad?" And without hesitation, he looks at me and says, "When you grow up, you can go with us." A few hours later, right before they leave, I jumped to the trunk and hid myself. I thought, hey, if he doesn't want to take me, I'll go on my own terms. 30 minutes later, I'm looking at the trunk open up as my dad looked at me with surprise. "What are you doing in here, Alexey?" he asked. "I wanted to go with you, but you didn't want to take me," I answered. Needless to say, he had no choice by then. I was going fishing. A few years later, I'm walking into the kitchen and I see my dad and my brother playing a game of chess. Instantly, I am intrigued by the silence and excitement of the game. The first question out of my mouth was, "Hey Dad, can you play with me?" "When you get older, you can play," he responded. And over the months, this story kept repeating. I became more and more confused why my dad kept telling me, "When you grow up." Again, I walked into the kitchen to see my dad and brother playing. This time I thought, if I show initiative to want to learn, my dad would want to spend time with me. So I came up to them, leaning on the table. I asked my dad, "Can you teach me how to play, Dad?" His response hit me hard. He answered, "When you grow up, I'll teach you." Shortly thereafter, spending a Saturday outside in the sandpit behind the house, tired, I walked downstairs to where my 2 pet hamsters were, just like I had every day. Those 2 furballs gave me so much joy. I loved playing with them. Although I didn't like cleaning their cage, but still, I loved those 2 little hamsters. Walking down, the news hit me hard. My sister, without asking for permission, decided to play with one of my hamsters and accidentally crushed his skull in a birdhouse. Sitting there on a couch, devastated, I'm crying with my little 5-year-old eyes and heart out, and after hours of crying, nobody could console me, not even my mom. Eventually, my dad came home and walked into my room. He came in and hugged me as I continued sobbing. Nothing, absolutely nothing made me feel any better until he said, "Alexey, how about this? I know you always wanted an aquarium. How about, in memory of your hamster, I will get you fish? What do you say to that?" In that moment, something clicked in my mind and heart. Getting a fish tank with fish in memory of my hamster took away the sting of his death. A few days later, I was so excited to see my dad bring an aquarium into my room. Finally, I thought, my dad does care about me. He does love me. He is actually willing to spend his time for me. The next day, I went with my mom and got a picture that you could put in the background of an aquarium. And then a week went by. 2 weeks went by. My dad keeps making up reasons why he had no time to get the fish. Weeks turned into months, months into a year. I walked into my room, looked at the aquarium, and stared back at me and reminded me how I was not worth my dad's time. About a year later, angry about this daily reminder how I was just not worth my dad's time, I destroyed the tank and trashed the picture. My mom asked me, "Why did you do that, Alexey?" I said, "Mom, it's been a year. He was never going to get it. He hasn't gotten it and will never get it. And now I don't even want it." The years rolled on, and I constantly watched as Dad kept doing stuff with my brother, but always had an excuse why he couldn't spend time with me. At some point, I made the decision that if I could just help my parents enough, I could get their attention. As the 5th of 6 kids, there was simply no extra energy for my parents to give any time to me. I always thought that something was wrong with me. What made life even more difficult growing up was when I had to learn things like math or English, it was an absolute nightmare. Reading was hard because words would fuse together. Understanding concepts was nearly impossible for me. Schoolwork was like pulling teeth. I learned to not ask my parents for help because I just could not understand how they explained things. This forced my older siblings to have to explain things to me. It would rarely be a quiet interaction. I asked my oldest sister a math question. She tried explaining it a few times, but my mind would refuse to grasp the idea. Voices would raise, and I'd end up crying. The only times I would not get yelled at was when I would help them accomplish something like doing chores with them. Just like with my dad, at some point I connected asking questions from adults with being yelled at, constantly feeling like I wasn't worth their time. I always felt like I was wasting other people's lives by asking stuff. At this point, I made a very poor decision. I wouldn't ask for help because I felt so unworthy of other people's time. At the same time, I figured if I could only help other people enough, I could get their attention to want to be around me. As the years rolled on, I dove into helping others without wanting anything in return. And for a while, this worked very well, and it helped me feel like I mattered. It helped me get the attention of other people who I helped, but the only catch was, I noticed how I would only have other people's attention as long as I would be helping, and no longer. I wanted to share these few first stories to help you kind of get into my mindset as I was as a kid. And going forward right now, I'm just going to go right into the full story from start until now. And here it goes. So, growing up, I'm the fifth of 6 kids. My parents only had energy for the first 2 kids, and the rest of us just happened to be there and had to figure life out. It was a shut up and do what you're told kind of life. Be seen, but not heard. Often, I'd walk into the kitchen or living room to see my parents investing time with my 2 older siblings, but when it came time to me, the only thing left was telling me what to do or else I was in trouble. With hardworking parents and 6 kids to raise, as I'm growing up, very little, if any, parenting is received. Lacking human connection and attention from my parents and siblings, I'm growing up and feeling unworthy of people's attention. Constantly feeling like I'm some lower class, substandard human being. And making things a bit more challenging. Unlike the average kid, when it came time to learn new things, my brain is extra slow to comprehend new concepts. With this extra challenge added to my life, now whenever I have to learn the rules of subjects like English and math, I am royally struggling, feeling like I was having my teeth pulled slowly and painfully. As people are trying to explain new concepts to me, we start out on normal, low tones, and by the end, the voices are considerably louder and I'm usually left crying. With this as my mental and emotional foundations, I'm making some seriously poor decisions early on my life. Decisions that are holding me back from developing as an individual for many years. Since my parents are not spending time with me, I'm now feeling unworthy of people's time. With the challenge of learning new things and people constantly getting frustrated with me all the time, I'm starting to believe that asking questions is equal to asking to get in trouble. With the fear of asking questions, the consequences are piling up quickly and they were multiplying. To give you a deeper look into my current state of mind right now at this stage, here are a few extra insights. I was born in Russia, and at age 3, my parents moved to Massachusetts with our family. What this meant that until age 22, I was growing up in the American society while being raised in a Russian home, surrounded by Russian culture. Would go to the Russian church, the Russian store, and have only Russian friends. And to add to the confusions of trying to figure out and understand life, I was raised in a Russian Baptist belief system. At this stage of my life, very little made sense. Things are confusing the heck out of my developing mind because of rules like I couldn't have American friends since it was too taboo of a thing to do. Growing up, Russian Christians looked down on the average American. Making things more confusing, the religious Russians were even more negative towards American Christians since they were looked at and viewed as some substandard, unreal, and undedicated level of Christians. From the cultural and religious point, the Russians thought they were better in every way than the Americans, while the Americans in return would always have nothing but good things to say about the Russian families and communities. The deck was stacked against my now developing mind. I'm feeling increasingly more and more unworthy of other people's attention because older people in my life are so unwilling to invest their personal time into me. Unable to learn things quickly, the people I'm supposed to look up to, I shied away from because I equated it to being in trouble and feeling stupid around them. Growing up in a religious Russian culture while living in American society, I spent 8 hours a day at school with awesome atheists, while at home, I'm under a Christian mindset telling me I can't be friends with these awesome people. Playing any kind of card games, dancing, reading personal development books was all considered of the devil. Even with the Bible studying, as I'm growing up, and going back to the original Greek and Hebrew languages to learn more about my faith, a lot of the older folks are looking at me and trying to push me away from doing deep research. Life is turning out to be more and more of all you have to do is not think and do what older people in your life tell you to do. To top it off, the religion I was surrounded by And they taught that you were this bad and unworthy thing called a human being who has to figure out what a deity wanted out of you and go live it out. By this point, a tornado seemed to have its ducks lined up in a row compared to this mess that is in my mind at the time. Unable to learn quickly, not being taught how to make decisions, always told what to think, nothing in life made sense. All the meanwhile, I'm slipping further and further into feeling like a nobody, feeling unworthy of people's time unless I did stuff for them, and most of all, feeling unworthy of some God in the clouds. The more I helped others, the worse I felt, since people would only want to be around me so long as I would be helping them. The best way I can describe how I'm feeling right now is used but never appreciated. I felt like I can't seem to make sense of my life, with no one able to help me learn about life, without parenting or guidance other than being told what to do and never understanding the whys of life. Slowly, I started rotting from the inside out. Fast forward to 13. This was the year my life started to turn around in a massive way. My grandfather stepped alongside and started to mentor me. Finally, I had someone who helped me start understand this thing called life in a way that made sense to me. Never was he telling me what to do or how to think. He's always teaching me how to effectively think about life and explain why things they were the way they were. With a breath of fresh air for my thinking mind, not long after, I got my first job doing flooring. I ended up giving all my money to my parents because I was desperately trying to get their attention and affection like my two older siblings were getting. But nothing seemed to be getting their attention. Seeing how this isn't working a few months later, I decided to just focus on me and forget about getting my parents' attention. School started and I could not work with flooring anymore. Through a stroke of luck, I came across an MLM called Herbalife and decided to join it. This is my first goal I set for myself. And to get into Herbalife, like all MLMs, I had to pay them almost $400. I asked my parents for money, but they said they don't have any. So, without missing a beat, I walked 50 minutes over to a horse farm and got a job. I worked there every weekend, vacation weeks, and sometimes during the week if schoolwork allowed. By now, it was winter, and if I wanted to work, I had to wake up while it was dark, walk by the deep, scary forest to get there, and work until after sunset. Every day I'd go to work, I'd get there while it was dark, and leave after it got dark with snow-covered ground. At that point, we probably had about a foot and a half of snow. And I would be walking by that forest, praying to God that those coyotes would not come out. After a few months, I raised enough money and got into the MLM. After a few months, things started to pick up for me in the MLM. Although I was 13, I started signing people up and was just about to break through and start making money. My brother and one of my cousins were just about to sign up. Getting off the bus from school, I walk in and see both my parents sitting. Instantly, I felt something was off. They walked me into my room, sat me down and said, "Alexey, you have to burn everything from that business because we have been told this company's tied in with the devil." Shattered. I wanted to be obedient. I wanted to be loved. I wanted my parents to see me as an obedient, good son, worthy of them giving me their personal attention. I thought, I'll burn everything in absolute obedience and they will spend more time with me. As I watched all the papers and products go in flames, like my previous attempt at giving them money, time would soon prove that even absolute obedience couldn't get my parents' attention. Their methods of raising me did not change, because later in my 30s I learned that they made a decision that spending time with me was not one of their priorities. With this devastating blow on both a business and personal self-worth level, I decided to just forget about wanting to get my parents' attention and focus on myself. If things seemed good before the burning of the MLM business, things were just about to get a whole lot better in the coming years. Shortly after the bonfire experience, I decided to start a landscaping company mowing lawns. Not long after, I had a dozen lawns to cut and clients started asking me to build stone walls, patios, and decks. I quickly grew the business, hired my dad and brother part-time, and a few other people. All of a sudden, things are starting to go my way. I'm making money, I'm feeling confident, not weighed down by wanting attention from other people. Finally, I became my own person and felt comfortable in my own skin. With money coming in, I bought a used Toyota truck for the business so I can grow it even more. With these new resources coming in, my confidence is skyrocketing. I loved landscaping, and at this point in my life, I decided to become a landscape architect. Now, I have a thriving business, I knew who I was, I felt empowered, and I knew what I wanted next out of my life. As the landscaping season ended and winter began, I joined the swimming team where a lot of the popular kids were. Surprisingly, I became good fast, and within a month I decided to focus on the 500-meter race as my choice for competition. And every week I would be getting better and better. With wins piling up during competitions, I started making more and more friends. With friends came invitation to parties. Now I didn't go to them, but the invitations were coming in. And as all of this was happening, a miracle happened. Something clicked in my brain, and in 9th grade, math, English, and Spanish all of a sudden just made sense to my brain. Math all of a sudden just clicked. I started learning higher math so I could build a rocket, and my math teacher even offered to teach me after school. My Spanish, after years of classes, also just clicked and I understood it. Tests all of a sudden became a breeze. I loved swimming so much. I convinced my coach to train me so I could actually go try out for the Olympics. And although he wasn't excited, he did agree to meet every morning at 4 a.m. before school. With my grandfather as a guide, school is going great, making friends at school, life is making sense, money's coming in with a successful landscaping business. As a cherry on top, I started mentoring a group of teenagers and created 2 long-term goals for my life. First, I decided to get into the Olympics with swimming, and the second was to become a landscape architect after graduating. Within a few short years, following the day I burned that MLM business down, my life became a dream. I knew what I wanted out of life. I had a dream, a goal, a life direction, and a vision for what I wanted to accomplish going forward. And then, February 16th, 2000 happened. 7 p.m. rolled around. As I'm learning the math side of things to build a rocket, I started playing around with the chemical side of things way too soon without any guidance. I picked out the perfect rocket engine canister and picked the chemicals. As I'm building this engine, which was an equivalent of a grenade, I wasn't aware of 2 dangers. The first was how the canister had a rust coating inside with an aluminum body, and secondly, I did not know that my body had an unusual ability to create sparks through static electricity. And at 7 p.m., put all those things together, and a quick sudden need to sneeze. Within a fraction of a second, I shifted my body away from the canister I was holding that was half filled with solid propellant. I shifted my body to sneeze. Enough static electricity collected to create a spark, and it ignited the now half-built grenade equivalent rocket engine in my left hand. In an instant, my whole room turned into 50 shades of red. A few fingers are flying while others were tethered by some skin. In that moment, my ears are ringing with a numb hand and adrenaline pumping, room full of thick smoke. I was in shock, unable to think clearly. Instantly, I just knew something was wrong, but did not understand how bad things were. It wasn't until a few months later that I learned of the seriousness of my condition. In a split second, everything I worked for vanished in a spark. And for the next few hours, I was flirting with death because I lost so much blood. Over the following days, my arm was in danger of being amputated. Over the next month, once that danger left, instead of my whole arm, my hand was in danger of being amputated. And then a year later, it was just my thumb that was in limbo of being amputated. But by then, my mind was like, I don't care. And I said to myself, it is what it is. I'll get used to no thumb. It took 2 years, thousands of stitches, and 9 operations to get me back to being a normal self-functioning human being. For 2 years, I am dependent on other people for everything. I'm a teenager toddler for my family. At one point, I had my thumb surgically attached to my hip and had to be in a wheelchair. 2 years of pain, suffering, operations, and being in survival mode. The day came and the doctor said, Alexey, you don't need any more operations. You are done with the hospital. After 2 years of being in survival mode and recovery and bed rest, the feeling was foreign. All of a sudden, the responsibility for living this life was placed back into my now 1.7 hands. By now, taking back responsibility for what I wanted to do next with my life was completely foreign. The explosion took my life from being 100% clear about life to now being negative 100% clear of what I wanted to do next. I tried landscaping and swimming again, and although I excelled at them, quickly I found out I had absolutely no desire for either of them. Back to the drawing board. Now, I'm desperate to figure out my life direction, to regain that clarity I had before the accident. Lost and confused, now I'm spending more time with my grandfather than ever before. But by this point in his life, leukemia came back with a vengeance. Life decided to take the only person who was helping me figure it all out. Luckily, the last few months of his life, I became his taker in the evenings since he needed someone around him 24/7. Every evening, as I'm sitting in his tiny apartment, I'm watching him pour his heart and soul out, helping people figure their life out right up until 3 days before his death because he could finally no longer talk because he was lacking oxygen in his blood. 3 hours before he died, I walked into his room. Tapping him on his shoulder, I said, "Hey, Grandpa." He opened his eyes, and I said, "If I don't see you here on earth again, I'll see you in heaven, okay?" He looked at me, smiled, nodded his head, and closed his eyes. 3 hours later, I was called back to help translate to the caretakers as his body was rolled away and placed into the hearse. At his funeral, after everyone left the burial site, I stayed behind to have my last moments with him one-on-one. Looking down at the heap of dirt, I looked up and said, "I want to be just like you, Grandpa." Instantly, a voice in my head said, "Alexey, you don't want to be just like me. What you want to is help people like I did." I looked at the sun, the breeze picked up my tears that were pouring down my cheeks, and I knew my grandpa had just given me his last bit of advice. Having experienced his impact on my life and on other people's lives, I made a decision in that moment there in the cemetery. I'd figure out how to help people like he did. With my mentor and guide gone, I was now on my own. Without his guidance, I was to go and figure out exactly how I wanted to help people. Without him, I had one hell of a journey ahead of me. Like most people in life, I took the first opportunity life offered me. My brother had a business and needed help. Wanting to be of service and help, I started working at the family business. And as I worked in the office, one of my cousins every few weeks is stopping by to catch up and talk about life. As we talked, I never felt pressured by him to start thinking in a certain way or doing certain things. We had a heart-to-heart conversation for an hour or two and then go our separate ways. Over the course of a year of experiencing this experience left a deep mark on me. Putting together my grandfather's last wisdom from the cemetery and having experienced this new kind of mentorship through my cousin, I realized I wanted to start helping people in a similar way, to step alongside other guys and help them figure their life out. At this point, I decided to go to college for 1 semester for programming, and within that first semester, I decided that construction would be the path I'd take to earn money. With my grandpa gone, my cousin becoming my next life mentor, and choosing construction as my choice of work, for the first time since the explosion, I felt like I had a direction for my life again. After years of searching, I finally had a general life direction I wanted to take my life towards again. Around the same time, I started to have a lot of challenges with my religious community because I disagreed with how they thought we Russian Christians were better in some way than the American Christians. I had to clarify these accusations to see if they are true or false. Naturally, I started to visit and befriend the American church right next door to our Russian church. My parents were not happy with me, and a chasm between us started to form very quickly and grew on a daily basis. Around this time in my life, one of my uncles started a church about 2 hours away where a bunch of English-speaking people were attending. Seeing how all of us have a value no matter what culture we're from, I decided to go every weekend to Albany and translate the service into English. By now, I've taken classes on translating and was getting good at construction. Every weekend, I would drive 2 hours to my uncle's church and translated and eventually started working with the youth. Doing this for months on end, through an interesting turn of events, my brother-in-law's helper for his construction business moved, and he asked me to help with his business. So the dots started connecting, and this amazing opportunity came up to get better at construction with my brother-in-law as my mentor. I was achieving my goal of helping other people figure life out by working with the youth group and was translating at the local Russian church. Shortly after, I moved to Albany, New York, and my first American friend there invited me to a local conference. If synchronicity is a thing, then this was magic at its finest. At this conference, I met a whole organization that focused on helping others embody the Christian life through a form of mentoring, just like my cousin had done for me years before. This is where I met Jim, my next mentor. At the time, he was 94 years old and was a survivor of the Pearl Harbor bombing. Talking to him for over an hour at the conference, I saw how his style of mentorship impacted guys for the long haul. I met guys he mentored 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 5 years ago, and as well as in the present time. My mind is now officially blown. I wanted to learn exactly how to help people like this. For 3 years after meeting Jim, I continued working with the youth group in Albany. One day, as I looked over my life, I realized how incapable I am of helping people for the long run. I could not produce the long-term impact like Jim had. And by now, not only was I translating 3 to 4 days a week, I was working with a youth group a few days a week and started a coffee shop ministry where I worked with college students sharing the Christian religion. Things once more started to seem like I finally figured this life thing out. Then, life threw in a harsh and an unexpected reminder. It showed how important the skill I am trying to learn was. One Sunday morning, I'm laying in bed because I hurt my back with a pinched nerve. Laying in bed, I heard the phone ring over and over again, a half a dozen times. My back was hurting so bad that I couldn't even get out of bed. About an hour later, my sister and her whole family walked into the house sobbing. Instantly, I knew something was wrong. I sat up and asked, "What's wrong, guys?" Through sobs, they explained that one of our brother-in-laws, who was my first mentor in construction and taught me how to start doing flooring, decided to hang himself in his bathroom. In that moment, all of our conversations flooded back that I had with him. How he was always trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life and how he felt it just all seemed impossible to figure out for him. In this moment, for the next 6 years, I could not cry no matter how much I wanted to. And eventually, the bitter bite of this experience wore off. But the need to figure out how to help people figure out their life direction never faded in me. And a few months later in October, I was sitting there in the kitchen at the round wooden table, looking out into the dark window. I looked at the time, it was 10 p.m., and I made a commitment. I said, I will go wherever, do whatever I have to, pay whatever life asked of me until I will find out exactly how I want to help others and take as long as I have to learn the skill. It wasn't long after that life gave me the next opportunity. From the outside, I was on top of the world. I was on top of my game with construction, became great at translating, loved working with the youth, and had a thriving ministry. To top things off, the girl of my dreams showed up in my life at the same church. And I really, really, really liked her. Everything I dreamed of in a girl was right there in front of me, and she even liked me too. And as life is giving me more and more opportunities to get better and better at helping others, I'm slowly starting to notice in life's rearview mirror that something was coming up, something that constantly came out to my attention. With so much going on, I started realizing how my ability to help others in the long term was just non-existent. I could help someone, but in a few weeks or months, we would be back at the same point with that person. I was noticing it more and more as I would have dozens and dozens of conversations with all kinds of people, from the youth group to the people from the coffee shop ministry. What made things very unique at that moment was the girl. Every passing day, I'm liking her more and more. But I just couldn't get myself to tell her how I felt because I've seen dozens of other friends and family members get married and quit on pursuing their life direction and goals shortly after getting married. So, for better or worse, I thought, hey, if I don't tell her anything, we'd stay great friends. Yes, I know, this is a serious head slap moment, and after torturing myself for over a year, I decided to finally sit down and talk with her to figure out what she wanted of her life. This conversation drastically altered the trajectory of my life. For hours, we sat there at Panera Bread by Albany Medical Center. I am on fire and asking her every question I could about what she saw for herself in her life going forward. This girl had incredible clarity for her life. Eventually, I asked her, "What's your stance on getting into relationships?" Instantly, she said, "I don't want to get into one until I get my nursing degree." Then and there, I decided to not tell her how I felt about her. As the months continued to unfold, a glaring issue for me came up again and again at the inability to help people effectively. This is when I decided to move to Savannah, Georgia, because Jim suggested that that's where I can learn this unique type of mentorship that he knew of. When I made my decision to move, my best friend at the time told me I was insane, and my pastor warned me that if I left, I could never teach at that church again. In the following few months, I packed up and moved to Savannah, Georgia. My best friend ended up moving with me, and the pastor, well, he held to his promise. If regret had a moment, the decision to let go of this girl of my dreams was that moment. It continued haunting me for the next 6 torturous years until I finally was able to be free of it. Having made the move to Savannah, I'm now settling into the life of life-on-life student and a full-time bathroom remodel. My only goal at this stage was to learn how to leave a long-term impact on people, not just for a few weeks or months. So all the meanwhile, while learning all this, I was becoming better and better at bathroom remodeling. As a student, my goal is to watch and learn how my mentor was helping and guiding people. There was no course to take or any kind of classes. It was all life-on-life lessons. Whenever he would talk, chill, or do anything with other people, I would be there, watching and learning. For money, I bartered with my construction skills. While staying at my mentor's house, I would remodel their bathrooms. While living in Savannah, one day, my youngest sister calls me and dropped another one of life's bitter realities. A young family friend in his 20s took his own life. This was a guy who I knew was suffering with the same exact question of what is life's purpose, and he could not figure out what he wanted to do next with his life. After we finished talking, 10 minutes later, I decided to give another friend a call to catch up. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something is wrong. He said, "Alexey, my brother just committed suicide." Within 10 minutes, I found out how 2 friends decided to take their lives because of this similar challenge of not being able to figure out what they should be doing next with their life. This news hit me hard, and for the next 2 days, I just sat at the local Panera Bread and contemplated life. Something shifted inside my soul. I knew I had to make a decision to do something more with my life going forward. And after 18 hours of sitting there writing and contemplation, I decided to do something that would just push me. And I knew I wanted to do something that would encourage people to pursue their life direction. And the only thing I could do was write letters of encouragement. So there and then I said to the universe, I'm going to write 1,000 letters encouraging people to pursue their dreams and goals. So I set an ambitious goal to write the 1,000 letters within the following 365 days. This meant I had to write no less than 3 letters a day every day. The first dozen letters took at least an hour each to complete. By the 3rd day, I'm already giving into my laziness and my commitment is severely tested. I give in, and 4 days later, I'm 9 letters behind. By nightfall, 3 more needed to be written. It was a Saturday morning, and I decided to either commit or just give up. Looking at how long each one took, I was prepared to spend at least the next 12 hours just writing. While sitting there as the sun rose, I recommitted, and after about an hour, letters all of a sudden just started pouring out of me. And by the end of the day, I ended up writing almost 20 letters. By the end of that day, I knew I will be able to accomplish my goal of 1,000 letters within the year. A few months later, after I completed a big bathroom remodel and decided to take it easy for the remainder of the day, the weather was beautiful, it wasn't too hot, it wasn't cold, it was perfect for some R&R on a hammock. As I began drifting into sleep, the hammock ripped and I fell to the ground. Underneath me was a pile of pine needles and under them was a 4-inch wide stump. As the stump met my spine, I knew something bad just happened. Within a week, I could barely lift my own body weight. Sitting was excruciating, and I would only sleep for an hour at a time because the pain caused nightmares and would wake me up. I wasn't suicidal, but I sure wished my life would end. And after months of torture, I finally found a doctor who was able and willing to work on my back. The only catch was, he lived in Albany, not in Savannah.
A few months later, I decided to move back to Albany, and once again, I had to give up on my dreams and had to stay in Albany to recover. My doctor said that this kind of injury would take at least 2 years to recover from. To no surprise, this meant my construction career also came to an end the moment that hammock ripped. By moving back to Albany, I could no longer continue with my training on how to mentor others. But now, I'm in Savannah on and off for about 3 years, and just like after the explosion, my life direction was reset. I was at the mercy of other people's kindness since I could barely lift my own body. Around this point in my journey, I finally mustered up enough courage to tell the girl from Albany how I felt about her. I called her and said, "Hey, I have an idea to run by you, and let's meet up at the college." So we met up at the college where she was going to at the time. This was my biggest fear in life to date, to tell a girl that I liked her. To spare you all the horrific conversation, it was an absolute flop. I stammered and started and couldn't put a thought in a straight line if I wanted to. Then I finally said, "I can't say that I love you, but I will say I really like you." In response, she did say she liked me back then, and we ended our conversation by her asking, "So, what's next for us?" All along, I thought she'd say, "I never liked you," but instead she says, "So, what do you propose is next?" Talk about a deer caught in the headlights. I remember puking out an idea, like I said something like, "How about you talk to your parents, I'll talk to mine, and we'll get back together in 2 weeks." She said, "Okay." As she walked away, she said, "You deserve better, Alexey." 2 weeks later, I texted her to meet up, and she responded, "I never want to see you or talk to you or any of your family or friends ever again." Needless to say, I decided to honor her request, and we never did talk again, and other than accidentally once awkwardly passing each other at a park. As if having to restart my life again and figuring out what I wanted to do next was not enough of a heartache, this complete loss of hope of ever getting into a relationship with this girl knocked me into a new low point in my life. Instead of jumping into a pity party through these toughest and darkest times, I just kept on writing the letters of encouragement, and they definitely kept me sane. Some days I would write 3 letters, while others I'd write up to 50 letters late into the night. By now, I was living in Massachusetts, and I moved there to help my parents, to help my dad and my brother, actually, to help them restructure their business and help my brother buy out his partners. Although I lost my ability to do construction work, I decided to pour my heart and soul into applying everything I learned in Savannah over the past 3 years as I was there. As the year progressed, I started to help guys from different churches in the area to learn how to grow and how to mentor others to grow in their Christian religion. I started helping guys both in Massachusetts and in Albany area in all kinds of churches. Life felt like I finally found my calling for the 4th time. Although I lost my life direction 3 times before, I was fully committed to spending the rest of my life investing into other Christians, helping them grow in their faith. Just like Jim had shown was possible years before. Once again, life seemed like a magical fairy tale where I finally found the thing I was searching for, that elusive purpose and reason for my existence. I finally had it in my grasp, and I was very good at it. I felt like I was living a dream. Little did I know life had a gift in store for me that December 25th, and just like in every fairy tale, mine had a gang of ogres and witches waiting for me as I was just about to cross the next bridge in my life. By the following October, I finished helping my brother buy his partners out, and at the time I got a 3-month consulting gig in Albany and moved back there. Things just seemed like they were moving in one direction, up, and away. Then December 25th happened. Nothing could have prepared me for the harsh onslaught of what was about to unfold. Not the explosion, the back accident, how that girl told me to piss off, not even the 3 experiences of suicide or my grandpa's passing combined could compare to the story that was about to unfold over the course of the next 3 months. On Christmas Eve, a girl from the church I used to be a part of years before decided to take a whole lot of different drugs and hallucinated some hideous things. On Christmas Day, still high as a kite on whatever drugs she took, she went to the church as they were all there and publicly, falsely accused me of the following things, like raping her, then leading a gang to gang rape her. She claimed she had evidence I was a leader of a cult, I was a leader of a drug group, and all sorts of other things. She said, I have enough dirt on them to put them away for the rest of their lives in jail. That evening, the doctor figured out during her examination that she had overdosed on a concoction of drugs. But by that point, the damage was done. And once again, within an instant, my life would never be the same. The church leaders, without digging into the girl's story, wanted to instantly excommunicate me. And during these critical hours, some family members even refused to talk to me. Although the hideous accusations were proven false almost instantly, the leaders of that church proceeded to spread those lies, and over the following weeks, all the churches where I was helping people told me one after another that they would rather I not work with them, even after I would explain to them the truth. Over the following months, the original church tried spreading even more lies about me. Eventually, we got together in one room and I showed the leaders how 100% of what they accused me of was absolutely false. After our final meeting, where I debunked their lies, they continued to harass me a few more times, and I warned them, if any of them ever tried reaching out to me again, I'd file for a restraining order. I needed some serious space between myself and the religiosity I grew up with. I completely cut myself off from that community, as well as 99% of my family members. After I passed that bridge, I torched it. I burned it down and never looked back. I had to make sure those ogres stayed behind and would never come back again. I made a decision. I needed to figure out who I was as a person. I had to figure out the thing I was searching for and to commit to it. Now I am on a whole new level of commitment to myself, to figure out what I started trying to understand so many years before. I'm on a new trajectory to understand who I am and how I want to serve humanity going forward.
It was around this time, unbeknownst to me, life was concluding a 3-year lesson about what true regret looks and feels like. Over 3 years, slowly it revealed through 3 separate interactions with the same person what not pursuing your life direction does to you and everyone around you that end up missing out on that special thing only you can create. Since I first started visiting Albany, I quickly became close friends with 2 brothers who were car mechanics. Every few months, I would stop by their shop with 2 cups of coffee. The amazing thing was, every time I visited, both of them would stop working, sit down on their oil-stained chairs, and as I would lean on a car, and we'd talk, catch up, update each other on our lives, and then go our way. After years of these interactions, we became great friends, and I always looked forward to catching up with them. Having worked as mechanics for decades and rarely wearing respirators, both of them ended up getting cancer. Years later, as I was visiting in the area, I got a phone call telling me one of the brothers relapsed and died and was revived, and he was in a hospital. They assured me he was in a stable condition and told me what hospital he was in. Time being of the essence, I quickly turned the car towards the hospital. As I stood there by his bedside, towards the end of our conversation, I asked him, "You just got a second chance at life. Is there anything you'll do different going forward?" Instantly, he said, "Oh yes, I'm going to spend more time with my kids and start writing that poetry I always wanted to and start sharing a lot more of it at church." After encouraging him to go and achieve those goals, we said our goodbyes. A year later, I happened to be in the same area and got another phone call with the same news. He was in the same hospital and was just revived again. Just like before, it was him and I talking one-on-one. At the end, I asked him the same questions. "Did you get to achieve your goals you shared with me last time we were here?" In that moment, I learned the difference between the look of sadness and regret. He looked down and said, "No, Alexey, life just kind of got in the way and I never wrote those poems I wanted to, and spending time more with my kids just kind of faded away once I got better." So I asked, "If you make it through this time, will you at least go and achieve those things?" Instantly he answered, "Definitely, I will definitely do it this time."
And just like the previous year, I encouraged him and left.
Often in life, either we learn through our own experiences or watch others and learn from them. This was definitely an experience I'm glad I got to watch instead of having to go through it myself. For the third year in a row, I'm in Albany and get a phone call from one of his family members. Alexey, he is not doing good at all. We don't think he's going to make it. Since I was in the area, I quickly make my way over to the hospital, and this time there was no conversation. It was just him and I in the room. Before I left, I said to him as he lay unconscious, if we can have just one more conversation, I would greatly appreciate the opportunity. As I walked out, I asked his wife if I could visit him at the house if he does get better. That week, he does end up getting a bit better, and his wife invited me to their house for dinner. When I walked into the living room, I couldn't believe my eyes. He was as pale as a ghost, and in my gut, I knew he wasn't making it out this time. A few minutes passed before he was able to muster up enough energy to get to the table. As we finished our meal, I looked at his wife and said, I want to ask him a few questions that you might find hard to hear, but we've had this conversation and I want to ask them. Are you okay with that? She said yes, and I asked my friend, 2 years ago, you almost died and said you had 2 goals. Last year, you had another close call and recommitted yourself to achieving your 2 goals. At this point, asking these questions, I was excited to what I was about to hear from him. And so I asked, so even though you haven't achieved your 2 goals the last 2 times, how about this time? Have you been able to achieve your goal to write those poems and spend more time with your kids? In that moment, I thought surely he had to achieve them since he had 2 chances at life. What I saw next was burned into my soul. If I thought I saw regret last time we talked at the hospital, this time it was 100 times more intense. As I looked up at him, his head and eyes looked down, and with sorrow in his voice, at the brink of crying, he said, No, I didn't. I thought I had more time. I neither wrote more poems nor did I spend more time with my kids. Picking his head up, he looked me in the eyes and said, Alexey, don't ever make that same mistake that I made. Life is precious. I knew the direction I should have gone, but I let life get in the way, and now I'm going to die. So go and do what you feel you're called to do. Don't let life get in the way. The day soon came, and as I stood there watching his casket lowered into the ground, I promised myself, when I clearly know my next life direction, no matter what the price or cost, I will go after it. For the 4th time in my life, what took years to build was destroyed in a moment. It took another 2 years to recover from this devastating blow from the church community. Although difficult, there was a glimmer of hope. Remember that friend I initially moved to Savannah with? Well, by now he moved back to Albany with his wife and a few other guys from Savannah to start a ministry in Albany. At this point, I realized that since hard physical labor was not an option for me and consulting was something I wanted to learn, I decided to get a factory job to learn more about manufacturing. Not long after, I took a trip with the guys, and after spending a day with them, one of them mentioned a term I recently learned about, lean manufacturing. Well, needless to say, within 2 months, I got a job there to try to learn everything I could about manufacturing and about lean manufacturing specifically. It was a win-win for me, and while working there, I was learning lean as well as training others in the principles whenever I'd get a chance. So at this point, instead of learning how to help an individual figure out their life direction, I drifted into trying to do it in a company setting with groups. For 22 months, I created training, learned everything I could, and helped as much as I was allowed at that company. 6 months into working there, I invested $3,000 to fly to California for a week-long conference to learn from my mentor about making manufacturing better and more efficient. Lucky for me, I got to stay at my mentor's house, who was the person who put together that conference. At the same time that I was there, his friends from Hawaii were also staying at the house, taking part in the conference doing training. Over the course of that week, we connected very well and continued to stay in touch over the coming years. 22 months later, I finally felt like I recovered from the extreme blow from my former community and wanted to do something different.
By now, I realize the company I'm working for will not take training as seriously as they initially wanted to. Afraid of the unknown, full of worry and doubt, I decided to go part-time, which meant I would lose my health insurance. Within a week, I happened to be at the right place, at the right time, at the Panera Bread by Albany Medical Center. I met a manager from a national company that remodeled big corporate restaurants all over America. By October, I left the job in Albany and got this traveling job because I really wanted to see America. And within a month, I'm applying a lot of the training at this new company, which eventually got the vice president's attention and the head for employee training. By now, I'm traveling all over the East from Maine to Mississippi, and the head of training told me he wants me to start applying what I showed them. This time, instead of taking 22 months to realize what the actual intentions were of the leadership, it took me only 4 months to understand that this whole training thing was not going to happen. In total, I stayed at this company for 5 months and traveled over 17,000 miles. At this point, I saved up a bunch of money and invested most of it into a business venture. 2 weeks later, as I was falling asleep in a multi-million-dollar home in New Jersey where I was staying for 2 weeks, life slapped me awake with a thought that would just not let me fall asleep. It said, "Alexey, you have to move to Hawaii." Although full of fears of the unknown, I reached out to the couple I met a few years back at my mentor's house. And within a month, I gave my car to a niece as a gift, packed a duffel bag of clothes, and moved to Hawaii to help my friend start her business. Within a month of living in Hawaii, my roommate called me to tell that the apartment where we lived in Albany was being sold. He offered to help get all my stuff out, and eventually I ended up either giving away or had to throw whatever was left away. And after trying a few dozen different things on the island, like working with chocolate and coffee farmers, life gave me 2 unexpected gifts. Gifts that I will never forget. The first gift was epic. Remember that business I invested all my money into? Yep, that guy just disappeared with no way to reach him. Talk about silly mistakes of life. Not only did I lose this $9,000 I invested, I trusted him and in the midst of the experience never had a signed contract. To make things a bit more real, the 2 other people who invested with him, because they also lost their money, now they were looking to me to pay them back the money, plus whatever extra percent that he offered them. I lost $9,000, had to pay back another $8,000, just got rid of everything I owned in Albany, and now I'm living in Hawaii with a duffel bag full of clothes. This is where the old saying explains. Every setback in life has the equivalent of a setup. You get to decide which one it will be, setup or setback. The second gift came in the form of a text message from a person who I've been helping figure out her life for the last year or so. The text message said, "Thank you, Alexey. I have you to thank for a lot of things I've learned. I overcame so many challenges and grew so much from it. I really think you need to get paid to do this because you're really gifted. You can help out so many people." Within the next week, a few other people I've helped figure out what they wanted to do with their life said the exact same thing. That's when I decided to go back to about another dozen or so people of whom I've helped figure out their life direction over the past few years and ask them to write me a testimony of how I helped them. As I started to get the emails back, something inside of me shifted. I realized I'm finally at the end of the rainbow. I finally have found that thing I wanted to commit my life to. And over the years, because it was my personal challenge of having to refigure out my life trajectory and life direction, I learned how to effectively help others learn how to go and figure out their life direction. Through this, I committed to creating and explaining the process I used over the years. I wrote the process and created a course because now my mission in life is to help educate and train as many people as I can to help them learn how they can figure out what they want to do next with their life. Helping people get clarity, confidence, and control over their life direction is my mission. What's yours?